One of the things that we are all seeing rapidly change around us is the lending environment. One of the things that's been true for a lot of years for churches is that local banks don't really understand how church finances work. A lot of times they look at our balance sheets and our P&Ls and are just confused because churches don't function like business does. And one of the things that we found is working with lenders who understand the rhythm of churches, who understand some of the unique opportunities that churches have, but also some of the things that are challenges for us moving forward. And today, Jonathan is here from CFR. CFR is a great company that lends exclusively to churches, that they understand how churches and committees and elder boards work. And I can tell you guys, for our campus in Ogden, Utah, these guys were able to just come in the last couple months and help us refinance a loan that we had with a local bank. They did it inside of 60 days, which is kind of like parting the Red Sea a little bit for us, and did it in such an inclusive way that really allowed us to feel like we were a part of their mission. So not only are we paying a mortgage every month, but we're actually helping support their mission and their vision and funding other churches. And so as Jonathan comes, man, we're so glad that you're here, and I would strongly encourage you guys, follow up with him today as he can really help you forge a path ahead when it comes to lending. Welcome, Jonathan.
Well, I appreciate it. I normally have a big bag of cash I drag behind me, but I'm only allowed 2 carry-ons on the airplane, so I left it at my home in Dallas. So I apologize, So, my name is Jonathan Lewis. About me, I'm a native Texan, grew up here in Houston. Go Astros. No one said that yet, which I'm very surprised at. So I got to go to the parade on Monday, which was fun. I've been in the banking industry for 20 years, also in ministry. And, it's one thing I love about what I do is it's great to dream. But if that dream is not grounded in reality and a plan to actually see it come to fruition, it leaves everyone disappointed. I've worked with churches in my career who get really excited. They work with contractors, they work with builders, even presenting to the church only to find out that their lender is not willing to fund that dream. Companies like CFR, we exist to fund ministry in order to change lives, working with churches as a ministry partner, not necessarily just as a lender, to help you accomplish your goals. You probably don't know much about CFR. Has anyone ever heard of a church extension fund? Has anyone heard that term before? So when you're thinking about lending, there are a variety of different sources you can go to. The traditional local bank, which I will say, I think we're very blessed in Texas to have a lot of really great local regional banks that have a heart for churches. I don't know if that's true in other parts of the country, but I definitely feel like in Texas we're blessed to have banks do that. The issue sometimes with your local bank is they're just restricted in what they're able to do, and definitely restricted in understanding what makes a church work, the heart of ministry. Typically when we're talking about funding a project, we're looking at in 3 buckets. We're looking at cash a church may already have. You're looking at a campaign, which is something that we always encourage churches to do. And then, if there's still a gap, that's when a lender comes into place. What makes church extension funds unique is their dedication specifically to ministry. So there's about 50 of them around the country. If you are a part of a denomination, likely there is a church extension fund tailored to serve your group of churches. CFR specifically serves, if you know Churches of Christ, Christian churches, non-denominational churches, those are the group of churches we work with. Generally try to not compete with each other. We're non-for-profit ministries, but our goal is to help churches fund ministry, not just provide the bag of cash, we do that, but really to work with churches from conception, during the construction phase, even beyond, to make sure that the project isn't over budget, that it's being done on time, and that it's being done in a way that's fiscally and stewardship responsible. So what I wanted to do was just take some time and kind of go over, this takes a little bit about kind of who we are as a ministry. We do investments. We do capital campaigns as well, not to go into generics, and then we also do loans. What I wanted to do is, when you're thinking about approaching a lender, there are essentially three different pillars that we're all looking at. And I have found, I've worked for large institutions, I've worked for Christian credit unions, I've worked for 2 different extension funds now. They all do it in some ways differently, but across the board, there are kind of 3 main financial things they're going to be looking at that as ministry leaders, it's important to just be aware of. The first is debt to giving. Second is your budget or ministry plan. I liked what you said about that. I thought that was a really good way of thinking about it. And then cash on hand and reserves. So with regards to giving, and this is something where your local bank's going to be pretty hard to not compromise, and they're going to look at 3 years of your history. Now, what happened 2 years ago in churches? The pandemic. Well, so right now, anything financially that happened in 2020 is part of your average that banks are looking at. That can be a good thing, or it can be a negative thing. We've had a lot of churches that actually improved financially during the pandemic, but typically they're going to look at a 3-year average, getting profit and loss statements, balance sheets. The benefit with a church extension fund is we, I guess, look at the ministry impact of things differently. Banks are going to be fairly black and white with that kind of thing. So they're going to take a 3-year average, which we would say right now, 2019, 2020, 2021, average that, and then figure out how much you can lend. What banks struggle, I think, a lot of times factoring in is any kind of positive trending that you're seeing. Lending to growth, if you will. We definitely do not ascribe to the idea that if you build it, we will come. But we also know a lot of churches have had significant growth that's really inviting them into a project that maybe their finances, haven't had that average over 3 years. I think that's where companies like ours, different extension funds, really benefit churches, is getting deeper into understanding really the trending, the vision, and then matching the finances to match with the project. So some things to just be aware of. 3-year average plus your year-to-date data. We're almost at the end of a fiscal year now, so 2022 is becoming more and more important. Any type of non-traditional sources, so churches that have rental income, schools potentially renting from them, daycares, partnership leases, those are great. We've seen a very positive trend with churches we work with and thinking about their building, not just the 15 hours, but thinking about different ways, not just from a revenue perspective, but how can you create more opportunity for ministry? I think Lionheart is going to talk a little bit. They're actually a key partner of ours. We've done several churches around the country where Lionheart's been a really nice partner. Those are great ways, but thinking about how that then functions into your budget, traditional banks want to see, again, 3-year history. If that's not there, that can present complications from a debt-to-giving perspective. I'm not sure who mentioned it, but concentration risk is a really big one for lenders. We always ask for the number of giving units that make up your total budget, and if 10% is being given by 3 or 4 people, doesn't necessarily make it a bad thing, but it presents risk. As y'all know, in the lending environment, the way banks look at everything is through the lens of risk. We do too, but we also try to look at it through the lens of faith and trying to balance, hopefully, faith and risk in a way that benefits the church, both in their short-term and long-term goals. Some things, so what I usually say with debt to giving, just kind of as a pretty simple way of thinking about it, is if you're thinking about a project, think about total number of your budget being no more than 3 to 1, whatever your yearly income is. So take that 3-year average, let's say it's $500,000. A bank will likely not lend more than 3 times that number. I think we had that issue we actually tried working together about a year ago, so it's kind of neat seeing them here today. But banks are going to be pretty handcuffed going over that 3-to-1 number. Church extension funds, like CFR, have a little bit more flexibility in operating probably between the 3 to 5. If you're over 5, that's what we would say would be a stop sign. That maybe your project is either gotten too expensive, or you may have to scale or approach a campaign company to hopefully bridge that gap. But thinking from a budgeting perspective, before you get too far, what are our average, and does that align with what we think we actually could get a loan for? I've been with organizations where sometimes that number is 10 to 1. That can be a little dangerous. Our goal is we don't want a church to have to decide between paying staff, providing for missions, doing children's ministry, and making a loan payment. That isn't good for anybody. We want to empower ministry in a way that is helpful, not necessarily hurtful. The second one is with regards to your ministry plan, or as you may call budget. When I was in seminary a few years ago, I took a stewardship course, and the XP who was teaching it said that your ministry's budget is the financial voice of your overall vision and plan. And I had kind of blew my mind. I always thought about budgets as kind of a boring thing we do behind the scenes. We all do one. We do one as a family. We do one as a church. But thinking about what does your budget communicate about your values, as well as what does it communicate about your vision and where you're going. I'm not sure a lot of churches think that way. I think it's a really healthy way to be thinking, especially if you're planning for growth, preparing for growth. The key ratios that we're always encouraging churches to think about is when you look at your overall budget, you really don't want to have more than 30% going towards what we call programming, missions, kind of outward focused things. Different churches have different things. Sometimes that number is higher. Keeping it balanced with the overall budget, I think, is pretty important. I would say the second one is probably one of the ones that we see as one of the hardest to maintain, which is how much you're paying staff. We're in an age where I think staff is very important, having different leaders dedicated to different ministries, being aware of what that ratio is in comparison to your overall budget. We generally encourage churches not to have more than half. Again, it depends on kind of where you are in your life stage of the church. I think the biggest thing to watch out for this one is as your ministry is growing, and especially as you're planning for a new facility, the temptation is to go ahead and get staff early before your building is done. That then creates issues from a budgeting perspective that can impact your ability to get a loan. So those are kind of complicated things, but just kind of be thinking about kind of certain metrics and how to maintain those. And again, in an ideal world, this isn't always true, 30% or less of your budget going to either what we call debt service or building maintenance. We have a lot of flexibility in that. I was just talking to church this morning where we're doing 40%. So again, the benefit of a church extension fund, especially if you're doing a project, is flexibility. And I would say customization, whereas a bank's going to be a little bit more black and white in these particular areas of, hey, if you don't meet these, we're not going to lend to you. A church extension fund, hopefully, is one that says we're going to try to customize this to best fit what your plans are. Okay. And then the third one is what we call cash on hand reserves. So you've got, this is one where we talk about funds that are kind of for your rainy day. I think this has been tested more than it probably has been in the last 10 years and the last 2 years. Churches that maybe didn't have as much cash on hand, I think PPP was very helpful for that. But always having enough cash reserves to provide for the operational expenses of the church. We usually encourage at least 13 weeks. Organizations like ours, if you do a loan with us, we're going to require as a bare minimum of a loan covenant having 4 months of your payment in an account with our organization. Banks have the traditional kind of thinking. I will tell you one of the things to look out for that seems to be common in construction projects is not preparing for what we call the soft costs. I don't know how BGW does it, but a lot of times that's not included in the overall budget, and so that can be, even sometimes 5 to 10% the church wasn't preparing for that they have to pay for outside of the overall budget of the construction project. Having that in hand or preparing for it, I think, is a really important part, so that you're not getting to the end of their project and you can't buy seats, you can't buy AV equipment, you can't buy playground equipment, those sorts of things. So we really encourage churches, as you're doing your overall budget, thinking about how much cash do we need to keep in reserves, how much cash do we need to keep for payment, as well as having the necessary cash at the end of the project to fund additional things for your facility. And that's the lookout for. So kind of a red light, green light kind of thing we do. What we usually say is if your total debt's going to be 5 times more than annual giving, if your staffing plus facilities is 85% of your budget, and you have less than 8 weeks of cash, probably a good time to pause and just reevaluate. We do a similar thing of doing a financial analysis free for churches to help them get an idea of like where they are, like what you could qualify for. We do essentially a strengths and weaknesses test, a stress test to help churches know where they can improve and where they're strong. Again, it's kind of the idea of 3 different pillars. There isn't one more important than the other, but if one is weak, the whole thing comes down. The yellow, which is more, if you're 4 times annual giving, staffing between 70 to 85%, and then 8 to 12 weeks, we generally will get behind churches like that, but then usually will require a campaign or some kind of debt reduction in order to do a loan. And if you're in the green, typically you're going to find your local banking institution is one that they're going to be willing to lend into that situation. If you're under 3 times income, if your staffing and facilities is less than 70%, and you have plenty of cash reserves, more often than not, you can get help from your local bank. We exist essentially in the yellow area, and especially when you're doing something new that's going over and above maybe what you have done in the past. Church extension funds exist to help churches like that. Yeah. So I have the privilege of, I'm from Texas. I only serve churches in Texas, which is not a small thing. I'm the only guy on my team that has one state, but I told him, my state covers 20 of other guys' states. I live in Dallas. I feel like I'm in Houston every week. My cell phone's there, my email. I have a table outside with information, and whatever way we can serve you, we'd be blessed to help. So appreciate you having me here today. So.